The front gate had barely finished sliding open when my grandmother's smile disappeared. She had been waving at arriving relatives from the porch, greeting everyone with the same warmth she always had. Then she saw me stepping out of a taxi with a single overnight bag. Her eyes shifted past me. My brother's pickup rolled into the driveway behind the taxi. Not just any pickup. My *** pickup. The bright silver truck my grandparents had surprised me with for my 25th birthday gleamed in the afternoon sun as my brother climbed out of the driver's seat like it had always belonged to him. Grandma frowned. "Miriam," she called loud enough for everyone to hear. "Why did you take a taxi? Where's the truck we gave you?" Before I could even open my mouth, my father answered with an easy laugh. "Oh, that's simple," he said. "Her brother needed it more." A few relatives chuckled awkwardly. Someone nodded. Another murmured, "Well, family helps family." I felt every eye settle on me. My brother looked everywhere except at my face. I forced myself to smile. It was the same smile I had learned to wear every time I was expected to pretend something unfair was perfectly reasonable. Grandma wasn't looking at either of them anymore. She was looking directly at me. She knew me too well to mistake silence for agreement. The birthday lunch was supposed to be the happiest gathering we'd had in months. Grandma loved having the whole family together, and every year she insisted everyone arrive before noon so no one missed the first meal. Normally, I would have driven the truck she and Grandpa had worked so hard to buy for me. They had surprised me with it only months earlier after I earned my promotion as a logistics coordinator. They said they wanted me to have reliable transportation for the long commute to work and the independence that came with it. Instead, I had spent money on a taxi while watching my older brother park my birthday gift in front of the entire family. Dad acted as though nothing about the situation deserved an explanation. He greeted guests, joked with my uncles, and clapped my brother on the shoulder as if he had done something admirable. Nobody challenged him. That wasn't unusual. Growing up, my father rarely explained his decisions. He announced them. The rest of us adjusted. When those decisions favored my brother, everyone seemed to find a reason why it made sense. He has more responsibilities. He has a family. He needs the help. Eventually, I stopped arguing because every protest somehow became proof that I wasn't thinking about anyone but myself. So when Grandma asked about the truck, years of swallowing my own feelings almost made me repeat the same excuse everyone else expected. Almost. She walked closer until she stood only a few feet away. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look angry. She simply searched my face with the quiet patience that had always made lying to her impossible. Then she asked softly, "Miriam, did you ever tell me you wanted to give away your birthday gift?" The question hung between us. For a heartbeat, I couldn't answer. Dad stepped in before I could find my voice. "Mom, don't make this into something it isn't," he said with an amused smile. Miriam understood the situation. She knew her brother needed the truck more. That's what families do. They make sacrifices. He looked at me expectantly. "Isn't that right?" Everyone around the patio fell quiet, waiting for me to repeat the version of the story they'd already accepted. I lowered my eyes. "No," I said softly. "I never wanted to give it away." The words were barely above a whisper, but they landed harder than if I had shouted them. Dad let out a short laugh. "You're remembering it differently." Grandma held up one hand without taking her eyes off me. "Everyone else, please enjoy your lunch," she said calmly. "Miriam, come with me." She led me through the garden to a shaded bench where the sounds of conversation faded into the background. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she reached over and squeezed my hand. "Tell me exactly what happened." The knot I'd carried for months finally loosened. "A week after my birthday," I began, Dad asked for the keys. He said my brother's van had broken down and he only needed the truck for a few days. Grandma listened without interrupting. I believed him, but every time I asked for it back, there was another reason I couldn't have it. I swallowed hard. Then Dad started saying it wasn't fair for me to keep such a nice truck when my brother had children to support. And when I reminded him it was my birthday gift, I looked down at my hands. He said I was being selfish. The memories came faster now. If I mentioned the truck, I was accused of putting a vehicle ahead of family. If I stayed quiet, everyone assumed I'd happily given it away. After a while, I stopped asking. Grandma's expression didn't soften. Instead, she watched me with growing concern. "What troubles me most," she said quietly, "is that you're apologizing while telling me someone took something that belonged to you." I hadn't even realized I had said "I'm sorry" 3 different times. She let the silence settle before asking one final question. "Miriam, did you ever sign any document transferring that truck to your brother?" I looked up immediately. "No." Grandma's jaw tightened. She leaned closer and spoke so quietly only I could hear. "Then how exactly did your brother insure a truck that wasn't his?" Grandma stood so abruptly that the garden bench creaked beneath her. "Come with me." By the time we returned to the dining table, conversations had started again. Plates were being passed around, and my father was in the middle of telling one of his stories as though nothing unusual had happened. Grandma remained standing. "Everyone, I'd like your attention." The chatter stopped almost instantly. She looked directly at my father. "Daniel, explain to me exactly how Miriam's truck became your son's truck." Dad smiled with practiced confidence. "I already told you. Miriam agreed. She knew her brother needed reliable transportation for his family." My brother nodded quickly. "That's how I understood it too." Several relatives murmured in agreement. "I thought she volunteered it." I remember hearing the same thing. Grandma turned to me without reacting to anyone else's comments. "Miriam." I met her eyes. "In front of everyone," she said calmly, "did you ever tell your father or your brother that you wanted to give your truck away?" Every face at the table shifted toward me. My father folded his arms. My brother stared at the tablecloth. I took a slow breath. "No." The single word echoed through the sudden silence. No one rushed to fill it. For the first time all afternoon, uncertainty spread across the table. Grandma faced Daniel again. "If she never agreed, where are the ownership papers showing the transfer?" Dad blinked. "They should be with the insurance." Before he could continue, my brother added, "I never handled the paperwork. I thought Dad had already taken care of everything." Grandma's gaze moved from one to the other. "So which is it?" Neither man answered. The contradiction settled over the room like a heavy weight. A few relatives exchanged uneasy glances. One of my aunts slowly lowered her fork onto her plate. Another uncle quietly leaned back in his chair, no longer looking convinced by Dad's explanation. For the first time I could remember, my father wasn't controlling the conversation. Grandma turned toward my youngest cousin. "Would you do me a favor, sweetheart?" The little girl nodded. "My handbag is hanging by the front door. Please bring it to me." Dad frowned. "Mother, this is unnecessary." She ignored him. Moments later, the handbag was placed beside her. Everyone assumed she was changing the subject. Instead, Grandma reached inside, removed a large sealed envelope, and laid it carefully in the center of the dining table. No one moved. No one reached for a plate. No one spoke. Every eye followed Grandma's hands as she broke the seal on the envelope. Dad tried to recover his confidence with a nervous chuckle. "Mother, honestly, this has gone far enough." Grandma ignored him. She carefully unfolded several documents and laid them side by side across the table. The smile disappeared from Dad's face. "I've always believed expensive gifts deserve proper paperwork," Grandma said evenly. "People remember conversations differently. Documents don't. She looked around the table before continuing. Before Miriam's birthday, your father and I completed every ownership document for this truck. We made copies and stored them in separate places. She tapped the first page. The registration. Then another. The title. Finally, she slid the top document toward the center of the table. There is only one legal owner. Everyone leaned forward. Printed clearly across the page was a single name. Miriam Akoro. Dad inhaled sharply. It's not what it looks like, he said quickly. Everyone understood her brother was only using it temporarily. I looked at him in disbelief. Temporary, I asked. It's been months. Before he could answer, my brother cleared his throat. I assumed everything had already been transferred, he said. Dad handled all of that. Grandma slowly turned toward him. So you believed you owned a truck without ever seeing ownership papers? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The silence was answer enough. Grandma's eyes settled back on my father. Daniel, do you remember our conversation the week before Miriam's birthday? Dad's shoulders stiffened. You told me, she continued, that if your son admired the truck, he might ask to borrow it. She paused. And I told you very clearly that this vehicle belonged to Miriam alone. Every relative at the table stared at my father. You looked me in the eye and promised you understood. Dad rubbed the back of his neck. I was only trying to help my son. You were helping yourself make a decision that wasn't yours to make, Grandma replied. No one defended him. The relatives who had nodded along earlier now looked down at their plates. Even my mother remained silent. Grandma extended her hand across the table. Her voice never rose. Daniel. She waited until he met her eyes. Give me the keys. The room seemed to stop breathing. Dad slowly reached into his pocket. The familiar key fob appeared in his hand. His fingers tightened around it for a moment before he reluctantly placed it in Grandma's open palm. Just as the keys touched her hand, Grandpa pushed back his chair and rose to his feet. He looked first at Daniel, then at the rest of the family. And after that, he said quietly, we need to discuss the inheritance. The metallic clink of the keys against Grandma's palm echoed through the dining room. No one moved. Grandma closed her fingers around them, then turned toward me. Miriam. I stepped forward almost automatically. She placed the keys into my hand. They have always belonged to you. I stared at them, unable to speak. Grandma looked around the table before lifting the title documents once more. These papers have never changed, she said. No transfer was ever signed because there was never a transfer to begin with. She fixed her gaze on Daniel. You simply decided that your authority as a father mattered more than your daughter's legal ownership. Dad lowered his eyes for the first time that afternoon. I thought I was doing what was best for the family. No, Grandpa replied firmly. You decided what was best for one child and demanded the other accept it. The words landed with a weight no one could ignore. Grandma turned to my brother. And you. He swallowed hard. I knew Miriam stopped driving it. His voice was barely audible. I knew she wasn't happy about it. He looked at me for the first time all day. But I convinced myself Dad had worked everything out. You chose not to ask questions because the answers might have required you to give it back, Grandpa said. My brother slowly nodded. I was wrong. The apology wasn't dramatic. It wasn't enough to erase what had happened. But it was the first honest thing he had said all afternoon. I looked down at the keys resting in my palm. Without warning, tears blurred my vision. It wasn't because I finally had the truck back. It was because, after months of being told I was selfish, difficult, and unreasonable, someone had believed me without asking me to prove I deserved basic fairness. Grandma stepped beside me and wrapped an arm around my shoulders. When your grandfather and I bought that truck, she said softly. It wasn't just to help you get to work. She smiled sadly. It was so you would never have to depend on people who thought your future was less important than someone else's. Across the table, one of my aunts quietly wiped her eyes. I'm sorry, Miriam, she said. I believed what I was told. Another uncle nodded. So did I. One by one, relatives admitted they had assumed I had willingly given up the truck because that was the story they had heard from Dad. The silence that had protected him for months now surrounded only him. Grandpa folded the documents and placed them back into the envelope. There's one more matter. Everyone looked toward him. From today forward, Daniel will no longer manage any family property, financial arrangements, or inheritance matters. Dad looked up in shock. Father? No. Grandpa's voice remained calm. You asked us to trust your judgment. He glanced toward me. You used that trust to take from the very person we intended to protect. He placed the envelope beside Grandma. Future gifts, investments, and estate decisions will go directly to the person receiving them. No intermediaries. No one objected. There was nothing left to defend. That afternoon, my brother handed me every spare key to the truck before leaving. The next morning, he arranged his own transportation to work. Dad tried calling me several times over the following weeks. For the first time in my life, I answered only when I was ready, not because I felt obligated. Driving the truck to work became part of my new routine. Every morning when I started the engine, I remembered that kindness should never require surrendering what is rightfully yours. Family gatherings changed after that. People no longer spoke over me or expected me to quietly accept every decision. They asked for my opinion. They listened when I answered. Dad eventually learned that respect cannot be demanded simply because of a title. Once people see favoritism for what it is, authority built on it begins to disappear. As I drove away from Grandma's house that evening in the truck that had always been mine, I realized she hadn't simply returned a set of keys. She had given me something far more valuable, the confidence to never again let someone else decide what I deserved.